I used to think hunger was just the absence of food. I learned later that hunger can live in silence, in shame, in the quiet space between what you owe and what you deserve. Every morning before dawn, I left our small apartment with a scarf tied over my hair and my heart tied tighter. My son Mateo was usually still asleep, his breath soft and uneven. I'd stand in the doorway and watch him for a moment, counting his breaths, the way you count prayers. Some mornings he smiled in his sleep. And I'd imagine that even dreams taste sweeter when you're young enough to forget that real life doesn't. The bus to the Thornton house always smelled of coffee and tired hope. I sat by the window, holding my hands together to hide the cracks in my skin. When the city passed by in a blur of wet streets and strangers, I practiced my smile. It was the one thing that didn't need ironing. The Thornton mansion stood at the edge of the old district, tall, cold, and surrounded by trimmed hedges that looked too perfect to be alive. I'd worked there for 8 months, long enough to know which floorboards creaked and which moods were safe to breathe in. Mrs. Thornton liked order the way priests like confession, strict, precise, and daily. Mr. Thornton was quieter, his kindness folded behind his paper. Their son, Oliver, was 12, a boy who threw tantrums when toast came out too brown. I started each morning polishing the dining table that could have fed a neighborhood. The chandelier above it held more crystals than our church windows, and I sometimes wondered if light itself behaved differently for rich people. By noon, the house smelled of butter and rosemary, and my stomach had learned the cruel rhythm of pretending not to exist. Mrs. Thornton's voice echoed from the next room. "Maria, remember the luncheon is at 2. Everything must be perfect." "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my eyes down. Perfection had a weight in that house. It pressed against your ribs until you forgot how to breathe normally. When the guests arrived, all silk laughter and clinking jewelry, I became invisible. That's what good maids do. They vanish into the wallpaper, their hands moving, their faces not. I served soup, replaced plates, poured wine, collected what was left. And there was always so much left. Half a roast untouched, bread still warm, vegetables glistening under light no one appreciated. At first, I told myself not to notice. But then I'd think of Mateo, of the way his cough echoed in our small kitchen, of the doctor's letter that I kept folded inside my apron, the one that said prescription urgent. I hadn't filled it in weeks. That afternoon, as I cleared the table, I noticed a slice of bread still soft inside, only the crust gone dry. The scent was faint but kind. I hesitated, just one moment too long, and that was all it took for temptation to become decision. I wrapped it quietly in a napkin and slipped it into my apron pocket. My hands trembled, not from guilt, but from hunger that wasn't even mine. I wasn't stealing for myself. That was the only truth I held like a shield. When the clock struck 7, the house was empty again. The laughter gone, the plates washed, the silver shining. I stayed behind to sweep the hallway and finish the laundry. By then, the bread had cooled against my side, as if waiting to be forgiven. It wasn't the first time. There had been other nights, small pieces barely noticed. A potato, a handful of rice, once, the corner of a cake that had already collapsed under its own luxury. I always wrapped them carefully, carried them home like secrets, and watched Mateo eat them as though he were tasting holidays. But guilt has a way of multiplying. Like dust in the corners you can't reach. That evening, as I tied the last trash bag and headed for the back stairs, I heard footsteps. Mr. Webb, the butler, stepped into view, his tall frame filling the corridor. He wasn't cruel, but he was exact. A man who saw things in numbers, in accounts, in symmetry. "Maria," he said. "A word, please." "Yes, sir?" He looked at me for a moment, then at the bag in my hand. "Mrs. Thornton mentioned the portions have seemed smaller lately." My stomach turned to stone. "I'm sure it's nothing," he continued gently. "But we'll have to be careful. You understand?" "Yes, sir," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded and left, but his words stayed, echoing louder than his footsteps. The next day was worse. Mrs. Thornton's mood was sharp enough to cut glass. She was expecting her sister for dinner. a woman whose presence always turned kindness into theater. I worked faster, quieter, smaller. Every word she spoke felt like an examination I wasn't prepared for. By evening, the house was glowing again, heavy with perfume and roast meat. I served their table, my apron stiff, my hands aching. As I cleared the plates, I saw it again. Bread untouched, chicken barely eaten, soup gone cold but still whole. I tried to look away. I tried to remind myself of the warning. But the image of Mateo lying pale in bed wouldn't let me go, so I waited. Waited until the dishes were cleared, until Cook went upstairs, until silence filled the kitchen like smoke. Then, heart pounding, I took a small napkin, placed inside the half slice of bread and a piece of meat no larger than my palm, and slipped it into my pocket. I whispered under my breath, "For him, not for me." But the moment I turned toward the back door, the light snapped on. Mrs. Thornton stood in the doorway, her silk robe trailing like judgment. Behind her, Mr. Webb's shadow lingered. Her voice was cold, sharp. "Maria, what are you doing?" My heart stopped. "Nothing, ma'am. Just cleaning. Show me your pocket." The room tilted. My hand moved on its own. I took out the napkin, trembling. The bread, the meat, both innocent and guilty in the same breath. She stared. "You were stealing from us?" "No, ma'am." "Please, I was saving what you'd throw away." "My son," but she didn't let me finish. "Your son? So you steal because you have a son?" Her words sliced through the air. Mr. Webb shifted, looking uncomfortable. Tears burned my eyes. "He's sick. He hasn't eaten—" Mrs. Thornton raised a hand. "Enough." She turned to the butler. "Call Cook. Let everyone see this. Please, ma'am. Now." The air in that room changed. It became the kind of silence that hurts. Cook came down the stairs, still in her apron. 2 of the maids followed. I stood there, a thief on trial. Mrs. Thornton's voice was steady, public. Maria was caught taking food from the table. "I can't have dishonesty under my roof." Cook's eyes widened. "Ma'am, But Mrs. Thornton cut her off. "I'll handle it." And then, something fell from my apron pocket. Not the bread this time, but the photo. The one of Mateo in his hospital bed. It landed face up on the floor, the light catching the edge of his smile. For a moment, no one breathed. Mrs. Thornton's eyes flickered down. Her expression changed. Just slightly, but enough for me to see it. "What is this?" she whispered, bending to pick it up. "My boy," I said softly. "He's 10. He's sick. That's why She stared at the photo longer than she needed to. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room. No one moved until she was gone. Mr. Webb cleared his throat. "Go home, Maria," he said gently. "Come back tomorrow. We'll see what happens." I nodded, numb, the bread still trembling in my hand. Outside, the wind had picked up. The city lights blurred through my tears. When I reached our apartment, Mateo was awake. "Mama," he said sleepily. "Did you bring something?" I couldn't answer. I sat beside him and handed him the bread. He ate quietly, his small hands breaking the crust like a ritual. "Good?" I asked. He nodded. "Tastes like you." I smiled through my tears. "That's because it's love." And as he fell asleep, the breadcrumbs still on his lips, I whispered the prayer that has no ending. "Please, God, let them see the picture again tomorrow." I woke before the alarm as if the clock inside my chest had been wound by fear. The room was blue with early light, the kind that makes everything look gentler than it is. And I sat for a minute on the edge of Mateo's mattress watching the rise and fall that had been my proof of life for 10 years. Counting to 10, and then starting over because 10 has always felt like a safe number to leave a child on. He stirred, and I brushed a crumb from his lip left by last night's bread, and when his eyes opened, he tried a smile that didn't quite make it to the corners. "You'll be back?" he asked, the question he asks every morning. But today it sounded like a test the world might grade. "By 9, I said, though I knew 9 belonged to someone else today. I kissed his hair and whispered into it, as if hair were a messenger. "Be brave, be patient. Let me carry the scared part for both of us." The city was wrapped in rain, Buses wore a shine-like apology, and the streets smelled like metal and citrus from a delivery truck that had cracked open its day. I held the photo in my apron pocket the whole ride, not looking at it but feeling it, the way you hold a stone from a river as if a river might remember you. When I reached the Thornton house, the hedges beaded water like pearls they hadn't paid for, and the brass knocker looked like it could bite. Cook met me in the kitchen with eyes that had been awake longer than mine. "She said 9, Cook murmured, folding a towel she didn't need to fold. "Don't be late." "I'm early," I said, and she nodded, though being early never made a whip swing softer. The study is the warmest room in winter and the coldest in summer and the heaviest every day. Books spined like soldiers, the desk polished to a sermon. Mrs. Thornton sat behind it with a cup she wasn't drinking, and Mr. Thornton stood by the rain-painted window, performing the work of looking like he was not listening hard. Between them lay Mateo's photo, still, face up, as if the desk itself had decided to keep it safe for the night. "Sit," she said, and the chair creaked, honestly, the one honest sound in a room that had learned 100 tones of performance. We breathed the clock for a while. Then she touched the corner of the photo with a ring and said, "He is beautiful." The sentence entered me like soup on an empty stomach. I nodded because anything else would leak. Mr. Thornton turned from the window. "How long has he been ill?" "Since before he could say the word," I said, hands folded so I wouldn't count the price of a bottle with my fingers. "And his father?" he asked, the way men ask about other men as if cataloging a species. "Not here," I answered. The kind of whole truth that fits in a mouth that can't carry chapters before breakfast. Mrs. Thornton exhaled, and the steam from her cup had already died, so the exhale had to do all the work. "I did not sleep much," she said, not a confession, more a weather report. "I kept seeing you in that pantry. I kept seeing him in this picture." She swallowed. I thought about the word steal until it stopped meaning anything. I held my breath because I have learned that the moment before a decision sounds like a dress being unhooked, quiet but decisive. "I can't reward dishonesty and I cannot punish hunger," she said, as if trying both sentences on to see which one fit her face. "So we are going to rewrite the rule." Her eyes met mine and did not flinch. "From now on, what would be wasted will be offered. In containers. Labeled. You will not have to hide your child in your pocket to feed him." I sat very still to keep from falling out of relief. "Yes, ma'am," I managed, but the words shook like metal on a rainy bus. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said, surprising us both. "Thank your son for making me remember what I vowed to be when I was 22. I didn't ask what she had vowed. Some secrets are expensive to speak and cheap to recognize. Mr. Thornton coughed into his hand like a man signing a check. "There's a cardiologist at St. Brigid's," he said. "Old friend from university. I've already telephoned. He can see the boy this week." I blinked the room into 2 and then back into 1. "Sir?" I said, and the sir came from a part of me that remembered the first time anyone brought me water when I didn't ask. Mrs. Thornton slid an envelope across the desk, pale as new dough. "Your application letter," she said. "The one where you asked for an advance. I never read it." She left the blame on her side of the desk. "I read it last night. I am late, Maria. I would like to arrive now." I nodded, because forgiveness sometimes sounds like paperwork being reconsidered. "Yes, ma'am." "There will be conditions," she said, "because Mercy in this house wears shoes. You will not take anything that has not been set aside. You will tell Mr. Webb how many nights a week you'll need to leave early for the boys' appointments. You will keep your dignity even when my sister visits." My mouth couldn't help it. It almost smiled. "I will try," I said. "Try harder," she answered, but her eyes were soft in the way a pillow remembers a head. Mr. Thornton looked at the photo as if it had a question for him. "What is his name?" "Mateo," I said, and the name warmed the room a degree. "Mateo," he repeated, and I liked the way a rich man can hold a poor boy's name without breaking it if he chooses. "I'll call St. Brigid's again." "George," Mrs. Thornton said, and the syllables were a hand on a wrist. He nodded and left us with the rain and the clock and a cup that had finally accepted its fate as decorative. Mrs. Thornton reached into a drawer and set a small, flat plastic card on the desk. "The pantry lock," she said. "You and Mr. Webb, no one else. There's a ledger on the inside shelf. Write what you take, not because we don't trust you, but because the house needs to learn a new arithmetic." I thought of ledgers I had never been allowed to touch, and felt something lift its head in my chest. Something shy and four-legged that likes open doors. "I can write it," I said. "I will make the letters neat." "Make them yours," she said. "Neat is optional." When she dismissed me, it was with a go and work that carried none of last night's razor. I returned to the kitchen, where Cook pretended to be fascinated by a stubborn spot on a pot, and then dropped the pretense to take my hands in her floury ones and read my face like tea leaves. "Well?" "They are rewriting the rule," I said, and Cook's mouth did the thing a mouth does when it wants to say a good curse for joy but chooses a hymn. "Thank the saints," she breathed, and kissed my knuckles as if they were two pink saints themselves. Mr. Webb later produced a small ledger from a cupboard like a magician, who also happens to care about commas. "Column for date, column for item, column for amount," he said, tapping the paper like a schoolmaster. "And a column for why, if you wish." "For him," I said, already writing, and the way the pen made the F felt like a kind of oath renewed. Not everyone was pleased by the new arithmetic. I could feel it when the gardener avoided my hello, when Clara's conversation turned into a saw cutting nothing in particular. Jealousy has its own linens. It drapes a room without being seen. But Mrs. Thornton had said the word aloud in her own way, waste, and once a mistress names something, the house must echo. That night, when dinner's noise was folded and set aside, Cook placed a neat stack of containers by the pantry's inner door as if staging a photograph of a better century. Soup that still steamed, rice studded with peas grateful to have been chosen, roasted carrots glossy as if proud of their orange, labeled, Mr. Webb said, pointing to my name written in his tidy hand. "And the ledger waiting for your poetry." I wrote the words and checked them twice, as if the government were watching through the salt. I left earlier than usual with permission that felt like velvet, and hurry on my feet that felt like salvation. The bus driver looked at my bag and pretended he didn't see, which is a way of blessing I do not take for granted, and the city had washed itself into evening like a woman combing her hair out after a long day. Mateo was waiting at the window, the blanket folded beside him as if he'd been saving neatness for my eyes. When I showed him the containers, he whispered, as if we might frighten the fortune away. "We feast?" "We eat," I corrected, though feasting is a word that insists on attendance when a child smiles like that. He ate small at first, the way the body does when it remembers scarcity, then more, then the sort of contented sigh I have always wanted to frame and hang over our table. Between spoonfuls, he asked if they had been angry, and I told him the true thing that would do the least harm. They remembered. He nodded with the seriousness of a boy who has seen both sides of a locked door. After he slept, I spread the photo on the table and smoothed its tired corners. I thought about Mrs. Thornton's sentence, "I cannot punish hunger," and how close I had come to being punished anyway. And I thought of the ledger and the columns making room for a why, and I wrote a small note to tape on the inside of our cupboard. "Eat first. Apologize never." The week crowded with new errands. A call from St. Bridget's scheduling us for Thursday afternoon. Cook showing me how to shock green beans in cold water so they keep their color, which felt like a metaphor. Mr. Webb asking, politely, always politely, if I might teach Clara how to polish the silver the way you do. I said yes because saying yes costs less than saying no. And because if Clara heard the way the forks sing for me, she might learn the music doesn't have to sound like ownership to be beautiful. Thursday, I wore my best blouse, which is also my plainest one, and held Mateo's hand too tightly on the bus, and then less tightly, and then too tightly again. And St. Bridget's smelled like lemon and antiseptic and floor wax and something else I can only call possible. The cardiologist, Dr. Keene, had the kind of face that listens even when no one is speaking. He placed a circle of cool instrument on my son's chest and asked us reasonable questions, and then a few unreasonable ones, like what Mateo dreams about when he is not sick. "Eating at a big table," my boy said, and the doctor did not correct him with reality. He nodded as if he had been a boy once, too. "There will be tests. There are always tests, and there will be a plan that costs what plans cost." But he wrote certain things on a pad, and then crossed out a number and wrote a smaller number, and then looked at me as if I were an ally and said, "We'll get him stronger." I carried that sentence home in my apron like a contraband jewel. Back at the house, the ledger waited obediently, and the containers were ready with their little white labels like invitations to a party that finally learned our address. Mrs. Thornton met me at the pantry door with her hair in a looseness I had not yet seen, and she asked, not how was it in the way people ask to be polite, but how was he? Like she had remembered that the world narrows to a boy's chest when you love one. "He is going to be stronger," I said, tasting each word to make sure it would not lie. She nodded and touched the ledger with 2 fingers as if blessing a relic. "Good," she murmured. "Then let's keep doing the useful work." I went home under a sky that had put away the rain for later, and I felt something in me unclench that had been a fist for years. It is not that the world had changed. The rent still waits with its wolf smile, and Clara still looks at me like my fortune is a theft, and Mateo still wakes in the night with a heartbeat that thinks it is a rabbit. But a rule had been rewritten in a house that paid people to dust rules, and now every time I heard the clink of silver, I heard it in a different key. The leftovers were not confessions anymore. They were a promise, bread with a date on it, soup with our name, mercy in a container that did not shake in my pocket. I slept that night at the same speed as the clock for the first time since winter, and in the morning I put on my scarf and told my son I would be back by 9 and believed myself. And when the bus sighed open at my stop, the driver nodded without counting my coins, and the hedge pearls glittered, and the ledger was a blank sheet waiting for the shape of our survival to become official, line by hopeful line.
The house became different after that morning. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier in a way that's hard to name. Every kindness has an echo, and in the Thornton home it echoed through silver and porcelain and the whispers of people who thought I couldn't hear. Cook began leaving the soup pot a little fuller, the bread basket a little warmer. Mr. Webb would cough politely before counting spoons, a code between us meaning, take what you need before someone else decides you shouldn't. But others noticed too. Clara, the youngest maid, had eyes like mirrors. They never showed you what she felt, only what she wanted you to see. She started standing a little too close when I packed the containers at night, her smile too bright to be sincere. "Must be nice," she'd say, pretending to straighten something near me. "Getting a bonus in food." I'd stay silent because answering would only sharpen her blade. Silence, I had learned, is the armor of those who can't afford armor. At first, I thought the worst had passed. The Thorntons were still polite. Mrs. Thornton even asked about Mateo some evenings while sipping her tea. "How's your boy today?" she'd ask, like she was asking about the weather. "A little better," I'd answer, because that was the only safe way to tell the truth, but peace has a way of turning fragile when too many people start handling it. It was a Thursday when the balance cracked again. Mrs. Thornton's sister, Eleanor, came to visit. She was everything her sister wasn't: loud, elegant, careless. Her perfume reached the room before her laughter did, and her laughter reached your bones before you could hide. From the kitchen, I could hear her voice ricocheting down the marble hall. "My dear Margaret," she said, "you coddle them far too much. Servants are like silk. Use them too gently and they lose their shine." I tried not to listen. "But sound moves freely when you're invisible." "I'm not coddling anyone," Mrs. Thornton replied, her voice composed but thinner than usual. "Oh, really? I saw the maid, Maria, isn't it? Taking leftovers out of the house. Since when do we run a charity kitchen?" The silver tray in my hands trembled. Cook's face tightened, but she said nothing. "She's taking food for her sick child," Mrs. Thornton said, quieter now. "It's not charity. It's decency." "Decency," Eleanor repeated, laughing lightly. "That's what you call it." "I call it weakness." The words hit like stones thrown through glass. Later that night, when the family was done dining, I was cleaning the table as usual. The candles had burned low, their flames small and nervous. Mrs. Thornton and Eleanor lingered in the parlor, their voices distant but sharp. "She's going to make a fool of you," Eleanor was saying. "Mark my words. The minute you turn your back, she'll be stealing again. Maybe not food next time, maybe jewelry." I froze where I stood. Even the chandelier seemed to stop breathing. When the sisters went upstairs, I moved quickly to the kitchen. I packed the food carefully, quietly, checking the pantry twice, then writing in the ledger as I always did. I wasn't stealing. I was following the new rule, the one she had made. As I wrapped the bread, Clara appeared in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "Working late again?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. Her eyes dropped to the containers. "You sure you're not overfilling them?" I straightened. "There's enough for everyone." "Not for me," she said. "Cook doesn't let me touch the leftovers now. Says they're spoken for." "It's the lady's order," I said. "Of course it is," Clara murmured. Then she smiled. Slow, deliberate. "Be careful. Maria, kindness from rich people comes with an expiration date." Her words stayed with me long after she left. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Mrs. Thornton was polite but distant again. Her husband avoided conversation altogether. Cook kept whispering, "Don't mind it, dear. She'll come around." But I could feel the air thickening with something unspoken. One afternoon, while dusting the dining room, I overheard Mrs. Thornton on the phone. "Yes, I understand, Eleanor," she said, her voice low. "No, I haven't fired her. Because it isn't theft if I allowed it. That's why." I said aloud, "Eleanor, good night." When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, staring out the window. I saw her reflection in the glass. Tired, uncertain, almost human. Then she noticed me in the mirror's edge and straightened her shoulders. "Maria," she said, "have the linens changed before dinner?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, pretending not to have heard. That night, the storm broke. Literally and otherwise, the sky split open with thunder just as the last plates were cleared. The family went upstairs, leaving only the sound of rain hammering the windows. I was alone in the kitchen when Clara came in again, her hair damp from running between the courtyard and the service hall. "They want you in the pantry," she said. "Who?" "Mrs. Thornton. She's checking inventory." My stomach dropped. "Now?" she shrugged. "Don't ask me." I wiped my hands and followed her down the narrow hallway. The pantry door stood open, light spilling across the floor like accusation. Mrs. Thornton stood inside, holding the ledger. Her expression was unreadable. "Maria," she said. I was checking the entries. "Something doesn't add up?" I blinked. "Ma'am?" "There's food missing that isn't recorded here. Soup, rice, even a bottle of oil. Can you explain?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "I wrote everything. I swear. Then perhaps someone else is helping themselves," she said quietly. I turned. And Clara was in the doorway, her arms crossed again. "Ma'am," she said, "I told you she's been taking more than her share. I saw her last night. 2 containers, not 1. "That's a lie," I whispered, but my voice cracked. Mrs. Thornton's eyes darkened. "Maria, is that true?" "No," I said firmly. "I only take what's given." Clara smiled faintly. "Then what's this?" She reached into her apron and pulled out a small roll of bread. The kind we'd had yesterday, now wrapped in a napkin. "Found it in the laundry room. Guess who left it behind?" My breath caught. I began, but Mrs. Thornton was already shaking her head. "Enough," she said softly. "I don't know who to believe anymore." The silence that followed was longer than thunder. Finally, she sighed. "Go home for now, Maria. We'll speak in the morning." Clara stepped aside, smirking just enough for me to see it. When I reached home, I sat in the dark for a long time, my apron still on, my hands still trembling. Mateo was asleep, a soft sound coming from his chest like a bird fluttering behind a curtain. I pulled the photograph from my pocket and stared at it. His smile looked braver than mine had ever been. "Tomorrow," I whispered to him. "Tomorrow, they'll know." But the truth is, I didn't believe myself. That night, I dreamed of bread burning in an oven I couldn't open. The house became different after that morning. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier in a way that's hard to name. Every kindness has an echo, and in the Thornton home, it echoed through silver and porcelain and the whispers of people who thought I couldn't hear. Cook began leaving the soup pot a little fuller, the bread basket a little warmer. Mr. Webb would cough politely before counting spoons. a code between us meaning take what you need before someone else decides you shouldn't. But others noticed too. Clara, the youngest maid, had eyes like mirrors. They never showed you what she felt, only what she wanted you to see. She started standing a little too close when I packed the containers at night, her smile too bright to be sincere. "Must be nice," she'd say, pretending to straighten something near me. "Getting a bonus in food." I'd stay silent because answering would only sharpen her blade. Silence, I had learned, is the armor of those who can't afford armor. At first, I thought the worst had passed. The Thorntons were still polite. Mrs. Thornton even asked about Mateo some evenings while sipping her tea. "How's your boy today?" she'd ask, like she was asking about the weather. "A little better," I'd answer, because that was the only safe way to tell the truth, but peace has a way of turning fragile when too many people start handling it. It was a Thursday when the balance cracked again. Mrs. Thornton's sister, Eleanor, came to visit. She was everything her sister wasn't: loud, elegant, careless. Her perfume reached the room before her laughter did, and her laughter reached your bones before you could hide. From the kitchen, I could hear her voice ricocheting down the marble hall. "My dear Margaret," she said, "you coddle them far too much. Servants are like silk. Use them too gently and they lose their shine." I tried not to listen. "But sound moves freely when you're invisible." "I'm not coddling anyone," Mrs. Thornton replied, her voice composed but thinner than usual. "Oh, really? I saw the maid, Maria, isn't it? Taking leftovers out of the house. Since when do we run a charity kitchen?" The silver tray in my hands trembled. Cook's face tightened, but she said nothing. "She's taking food for her sick child," Mrs. Thornton said, quieter now. "It's not charity. It's decency." "Decency," Eleanor repeated, laughing lightly. "That's what you call it." "I call it weakness." The words hit like stones thrown through glass. Later that night, when the family was done dining, I was cleaning the table as usual. The candles had burned low, their flames small and nervous. Mrs. Thornton and Eleanor lingered in the parlor, their voices distant but sharp. "She's going to make a fool of you," Eleanor was saying. "Mark my words. The minute you turn your back, she'll be stealing again. Maybe not food next time, maybe jewelry." I froze where I stood. Even the chandelier seemed to stop breathing. When the sisters went upstairs, I moved quickly to the kitchen. I packed the food carefully, quietly, checking the pantry twice, then writing in the ledger as I always did. I wasn't stealing. I was following the new rule, the one she had made. As I wrapped the bread, Clara appeared in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "Working late again?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. Her eyes dropped to the containers. "You sure you're not overfilling them?" I straightened. "There's enough for everyone." "Not for me," she said. "Cook doesn't let me touch the leftovers now. Says they're spoken for." "It's the lady's order," I said. "Of course it is," Clara murmured. Then she smiled. Slow, deliberate. "Be careful. Maria, kindness from rich people comes with an expiration date." Her words stayed with me long after she left. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Mrs. Thornton was polite but distant again. Her husband avoided conversation altogether. Cook kept whispering, "Don't mind it, dear. She'll come around." But I could feel the air thickening with something unspoken. One afternoon, while dusting the dining room, I overheard Mrs. Thornton on the phone. "Yes, I understand, Eleanor," she said, her voice low. "No, I haven't fired her. Because it isn't theft if I allowed it. That's why." I said aloud, "Eleanor, good night." When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, staring out the window. I saw her reflection in the glass. Tired, uncertain, almost human. Then she noticed me in the mirror's edge and straightened her shoulders. "Maria," she said, "have the linens changed before dinner?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, pretending not to have heard. That night, the storm broke. Literally and otherwise, the sky split open with thunder just as the last plates were cleared. The family went upstairs, leaving only the sound of rain hammering the windows. I was alone in the kitchen when Clara came in again, her hair damp from running between the courtyard and the service hall. "They want you in the pantry," she said. "Who?" "Mrs. Thornton. She's checking inventory." My stomach dropped. "Now?" she shrugged. "Don't ask me." I wiped my hands and followed her down the narrow hallway. The pantry door stood open, light spilling across the floor like accusation. Mrs. Thornton stood inside, holding the ledger. Her expression was unreadable. "Maria," she said. "I was checking the entries. Something doesn't add up." I blinked. Ma'am, there's food missing that isn't recorded here. Soup, rice, even a bottle of oil. Can you explain? I felt the blood drain from my face. I wrote everything. I swear. Then perhaps someone else is helping themselves, she said quietly. I turned. And Clara was in the doorway, her arms crossed again. Ma'am, she said, I told you she's been taking more than her share. I saw her last night. 2 containers, not 1. That's a lie, I whispered, but my voice cracked. Mrs. Thornton's eyes darkened. Maria, is that true? No, I said firmly. I only take what's given. Clara smiled faintly. Then what's this? She reached into her apron and pulled out a small roll of bread. The kind we'd had yesterday, now wrapped in a napkin. Found it in the laundry room. Guess who left it behind? My breath caught. I began, but Mrs. Thornton was already shaking her head. Enough, she said softly. I don't know who to believe anymore. The silence that followed was longer than thunder. Finally, she sighed. Go home for now, Maria. We'll speak in the morning. Clara stepped aside, smirking just enough for me to see it. When I reached home, I sat in the dark for a long time. My apron still on, my hands still trembling. Mateo was asleep, a soft sound coming from his chest like a bird fluttering behind a curtain. I pulled the photograph from my pocket and stared at it. His smile looked braver than mine had ever been. Tomorrow, I whispered to him. Tomorrow, they'll know. But the truth is, I didn't believe myself. That night, I dreamed of bread burning in an oven I couldn't open. When the morning came, it was gray and brittle, the kind of morning that looks like it's already tired of being alive. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's smirk in the pantry doorway, her voice slicing through the quiet like a knife made just for me. Mateo stirred in his sleep beside me, and I laid my hand over his chest, counting the uneven beats, whispering softly, For you, for you, everything for you. The clock said 7. I had to go. When I arrived at the Thornton house, the rain had returned, steady and mean, hammering the front steps until the world looked washed out. Cook met me in the kitchen, but she couldn't look me in the eye. She wants to see you, she said, and her hands twisted in her apron like she was trying to wring the guilt out of them. Did she say why? No, Cook's voice cracked. But she's not herself this morning? That made me laugh under my breath, the sad kind of laugh that comes out like a cough. When is she ever? Cook looked up then, startled, as if she'd never heard me speak that sharply. But hunger, fear, and shame have a way of sharpening the edges of a person until even kindness cuts. The study door was open when I reached it. Mrs. Thornton sat behind her desk again, the ledger in front of her, the photo of Mateo lying beside it, face down this time. Her hands were folded neatly, her expression unreadable. Come in, she said without looking up. I stood just inside the door, dripping rain onto the rug. Do you know why you're here? She asked. I swallowed. Because someone lied. Her eyes flicked up. You think so? I know so. Clara. Yes, can you prove it? The question struck harder than any slap could have. No, I said finally, because she's clever, and I'm not allowed to be. Mrs. Thornton sighed, pressing her fingertips to her temples. Maria, you've put me in a difficult position. I wanted to tell her she hadn't put me anywhere, that the world had built a small, windowless room for women like me and just called it employment. But I only said, I've told the truth, ma'am. She looked up again, eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. Pity, maybe, or weariness. You may not come in tomorrow, she said. I need to decide what to do. It was the politest way to fire someone. I understand, I whispered, even though I didn't. She looked at the photo once more. Then quietly, she turned it face up again. You can go now. I nodded, turned, and walked out, holding myself together like someone carrying broken glass in her arms. Back in the kitchen, Cook was waiting, tears already shining in her eyes. What did she say? She needs to decide. Oh, child. It's fine, I lied. Everything's fine. But my voice cracked on the word fine, and Cook heard it. She pressed a roll into my palm, warm, soft, fragrant. Take this, she said. They'll see. Then let them. Her kindness broke me more than cruelty ever could. I walked out into the rain, the bread tucked under my coat like a secret heartbeat. The bus was late. The air smelled of iron and wet wool. I watched the world go by through fogged glass, wondering how a life could unravel so quietly. one kindness at a time. When I reached home, Mateo was sitting by the window, pale but awake. "You're early," he said. "I know. Did they fire you?" His voice was small, but the question wasn't. I knelt beside him and forced a smile. "Not yet," he tilted his head. "Then why do you look like that?" "Like what? Like when you tell me you're not hungry?" I laughed, a sound too brittle to be real, and handed him the roll. "Here," I said. "Still warm." He took it, broke it in half, and offered me the bigger piece. "You need it more." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You're growing." "So are you," he said. His seriousness undid me. I turned my face away so he wouldn't see the tears. That evening, as the rain finally thinned into mist, there was a knock at the door, soft, hesitant, but certain. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it. Mrs. Thornton stood there. For a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of the sight. The expensive coat soaked through, her hair wet, her breath visible in the cool air. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside, too stunned to answer. The apartment was small, cluttered with the unhideable signs of poverty, peeling wallpaper, a leaky faucet, a child's drawings taped to the walls. She looked around without judgment, just seeing. And then her eyes fell on Mateo. He was standing in the corner, barefoot, the roll still in his hand. "Hello," she said softly. "You must be Mateo." He nodded, shy but polite. Mrs. Thornton knelt slightly so their eyes met. "Do you know who I am?" He nodded again. "Your mama's boss," she smiled faintly. "That's right." "And do you know why I came?" He hesitated. "Because she didn't steal." The words landed in the air like a benediction. Mrs. Thornton blinked, then glanced at me, tears gathering but not falling. "Did he know?" she asked. I shook my head. "He knows everything." She sat at the small kitchen table, resting her hands on her knees. "Maria, I owe you an apology." I said nothing. "Clara came to me this afternoon," she continued. She confessed. "Said she'd been taking food herself and blaming you. Said she never thought it would go this far." I closed my eyes. The air left my lungs like a sigh too old to belong to this body. "I told her she's dismissed," Mrs. Thornton said, "effective immediately." I nodded, unable to speak. Then she looked around the room again. At the small pile of folded laundry, the chipped mug by the sink, the one empty bottle of medicine on the counter. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I thought I did. I thought giving you food was enough." "It was," I said quickly. "You saved him." She shook her head. "No, you did that. All I did was stop pretending waste was holy." The sentence stunned me. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed. "For the hospital," she said. "Don't argue. I can't." "You can," she interrupted. "And you will." "It's not charity, Maria. It's a correction." She stood, smoothing her coat. "You'll come back to work tomorrow. Same position, same hours, but no more hiding food. I'll speak to Cook. She'll pack it for you herself. And once a week, you'll have the afternoon off for his appointments. Understood?" I nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, ma'am." As she turned to leave, Mateo ran forward. "Wait," he said, and she stopped. He pressed the roll, what was left of it, into her hand. "So you don't get hungry." She froze, then knelt and kissed his forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. I think I already got what I came for. And then she left, the rain catching her again as she stepped into the night. That night, after Mateo fell asleep, I sat by the window, the envelope unopened on the table, the streetlights flickering like shy stars. I thought about everything, the bread, the lies, the mercy, the humiliation, and realized that sometimes salvation doesn't come from faith or miracles. Sometimes it just walks up to your door in the rain, carrying its own apology. I looked at Mateo's photo, the same one that had changed everything, and whispered, "You see, my love? Even the rich can learn to be hungry." The wind rattled the glass, but softly, like it agreed. 3 months can change a whole life, or nothing at all. It depends on who's paying attention. For me, it changed everything, one heartbeat at a time. The mornings began differently now. I no longer rushed to hide the food in my apron, or glanced nervously over my shoulder in the pantry. Cook prepared a small parcel for me at the end of every evening. Soup, bread, fruit, each wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. It was ordinary to everyone else, but to me it was proof that rules could be rewritten by kindness. Mateo was getting stronger. The doctor at St. Brigid's said the treatments were working, that his heart was learning how to keep time again. He still tired easily, but now his color had returned, pink in his cheeks, light in his eyes. Sometimes when he laughed, the sound startled me. It had been so long since laughter felt safe. Mrs. Thornton had changed too. She was still composed, still carried herself like a woman made of glass and grace. But her eyes softened when they landed on me. Some afternoons, she'd ask how Mateo was before asking about the silverware. It was a small thing, but for women like her, small things are revolutions. The next evening, I dressed Mateo in his cleanest shirt and mended jacket. He looked small but proud, his hair slicked back too carefully. I wore my best dress, plain, faded blue, the same one I'd worn to my interview almost a year ago. I almost changed, afraid it would embarrass them. But Mateo said, "You look like you, Mama." That's good enough. When we arrived, the lights in the dining room were softer than usual, like they'd been dimmed for tenderness. The long table was set, but this time only a few places were arranged. No grand feast, just warmth. Mrs. Thornton greeted us at the door herself, wearing no jewelry except her wedding band. Mr. Thornton was beside her, smiling shyly. "Welcome, Maria," she said, and for the first time, my name didn't sound like an order. "Thank you, ma'am." "None of that tonight," she said gently. "You'll call me Margaret. And this is George." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Oliver, their son, peeked from behind the banister. He looked taller than I remembered. "Is that your boy?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "This is Mateo." Oliver stepped forward. "Hi, want to see my train set after dinner?" Mateo's eyes widened. "You have trains?" "Dozens," Oliver said, grinning. "And tunnels, too." Their laughter filled the hallway. The easy kind that doesn't need permission. At the table, everything felt different. I'd served at this table hundreds of times, polishing, refilling, clearing, but I'd never sat at it. I half expected someone to tap my shoulder and tell me to move, but no one did. Cook even joined for dessert, shaking her head when I tried to help with the plates. Mrs. Thornton, Margaret, poured me tea herself. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said with a small smile. "It feels like dreaming," I admitted. She nodded. Dreams start that way. The meal was simple. Roast chicken, vegetables, bread still warm. But to me it tasted like forgiveness. At one point, Mateo leaned close and whispered, "This tastes like what you brought me before." I smiled. That's because it's the same love, just on a different plate. After dinner, Mr. Thornton raised a glass. Not a formal toast, just a gentle clink that made the air shimmer. "To Maria," he said, "for reminding us what food is for." I wanted to protest, to tell him I hadn't taught them anything, but the lump in my throat was too large to argue with. Mrs. Thornton reached into a small box on the table and took out Mateo's photograph. The same one that had once fallen from my pocket, the one that had exposed me and saved me. It was framed now, polished, protected. She placed it on the mantel beside a newer picture, one of Oliver, laughing. "They belong together," she said softly. Mateo's mouth fell open. "That's me." "Yes," she said, smiling. "So you'll always have a place here." He looked at me, then at her, unsure how to hold so much kindness at once. After the meal, while the boys played trains in the next room, I stood by the window with Mrs. Thornton. Outside, the rain had started again. Gentle this time. The forgiving kind. "I used to think charity was a gift," she said quietly. "But it's a mirror, isn't it? It shows you what you've been ignoring." I nodded. "And sometimes it shows you what you could be." She looked at me then, her expression soft but fierce. "You saved him," she said. "And maybe, in a strange way, you saved me too." I didn't know what to say. So I said the only true thing I could. "We were both hungry." She smiled. "Yes, we were." When Mateo and I left that night, the streets shimmered with rain, and I held his hand tightly as we walked to the bus stop. He kept looking back at the house, its windows glowing like small suns against the dark. "Do you think we'll go back?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But not as we used to." "What are we now?" I thought for a moment. "Maybe something better than guests. Maybe family in a different language." He grinned. "Can we bring them soup next time?" I laughed, brushing the rain from his hair. "Yes, I think they'd like that." Later that night, after I tucked him in, I sat by the window again, the framed photo of him now glowing in the soft lamplight. I thought of everything that had happened. The accusations, the shame, the photo in my pocket that had been both my crime and my redemption. If someone had told me months ago that the people who nearly destroyed me would one day break bread with me, I would have called it a cruel joke. But life, I've learned, loves to play its tricks. And sometimes, mercy is the punchline. I whispered a small prayer, not for miracles, but for steadiness, for the courage to stay grateful even when kindness hurts. Outside, the rain tapped the glass like quiet applause. And in that sound, I heard a promise I'd been too afraid to believe before. No one is too poor to give love, and no one is too rich to need it.